Got it. I'll spell out all numerals in words, keep them sparse, and avoid shorthand like BPM. Here is a revised hook and setup in English, following your constraints. The reason you would not last a day is simple. The air and heat erode capacity faster than decisions can stabilize the line. On November 8th, 2018, near Paradise, California, the campfire ran downslope under gusts near 20 meters per second, with humidity close to 6%. Fine fuels flashed after short preheating, tools grew hot, and crews lost pace on steep side hills. Within about half an hour, the delay widened, spotting distances and closed margins for safe flanking. By the time a first hose lay gained steady pressure, the head and multiple spots had already outrun the plan. This account explains the short clocks that govern survival in California and Oregon during 2018 through 2021. Heat and dehydration shift core temperature within roughly 1 hour. Smoke burden rises over 2 to 6 hours. Calories and glycogen set tempo across half a day to a full day. Judgment softens after a day and a half without full rest. Understanding these mechanics helps planners, crews, and residents interpret maps and promises. A line that looks efficient at 8 in the morning fails at 2 in the afternoon on a slope above 30% when fine fuel moisture sits near 6% and a ridge gust jumps above 15 meters per second. The same people who cut a few hundred meters at low elevation in cool air struggle to hold a short segment above 1,000 meters after a night under drift smoke. The era brought 3 hard constraints. First, multi-year drought raised vapor pressure deficits and dried 1-hour and 10-hour fuels across the Sierra and the Southern Cascades, so fine fuel moisture often hovered near 5% on red flag days. Second, overlapping incidents stretched people and travel, as in 2020 when the August complex grew beyond 4,000 square kilometers, while Oregon valleys recorded daily smoke with particulate levels above 200 micrograms per cubic meter. Third, the wildland-urban interface along corridors like California Highway 70 and Oregon Highway 22 forced structure triage within minutes of arrival. Now crews work under the Incident Command System inside the National Incident Management System adopted in 2004 with standard divisions and shared radio plans. Then, in 1935, the 10 in the morning target pushed early knockdown rather than weeks of extended attack. Instead of a single push to containment, this period favored long campaigns where water, air, and calories failed first, and logistics and law set the outer limits. On an August morning in 2021, near Greenville in Plumas County, the Dixie Fire pushed through mixed conifer stands while the shade temperature sat in the mid-20s Celsius and climbed toward the mid-30s by early afternoon. A hand crew stepped off a dozer spur at first light and moved along a side hill that held a steady 30% grade. Within the first half hour, the first limitation appeared. The combination of steep footing, radiant heat from burning litter, and dry air forced the pace down to a slow line of short steps and long exhales. The window for safe work closed more quickly than the map suggested because heat moved faster than hose and tools. Personal protective equipment added load and reduced heat loss. A Nomex shirt and brush pants trapped a layer of warm air, while leather gloves, a hard hat, and 8-inch boots reduced airflow over skin. The pack and tool together weighed near 20 kilograms, including a shovel or a Pulaski, a spare pair of gloves, 2 or more canteens, and an emergency shelter. Under sun and slope, sweat loss rose toward more than a liter per hour even before the flame front arrived. In practice, the crew could plan steady output for 20 minutes. However, the combination of clothing and radiant heat shortened functional intervals to nearer 15 minutes unless there was shade or a breeze. Water supply set the next boundary. A typical firefighter carried 2 to 4 liters at step-off, and an engine or a helicopter bucket supplied additional water for hose lays and reels. On a ridge without engine access, the crew relied on a portable tank near a drop point and on caches along the line. Each liter weighed a full kilogram, so carrying enough for a 12-hour shift meant a mass that cut speed and attention. Instead of frequent small sips every 10 minutes, most people took larger drinks during brief pauses, which delayed rehydration and allowed core temperature to climb. That choice lowered cramp risk for a moment, yet it raised fatigue later in the day. Radiant heat near open flame doubled the stress on thermoregulation. Flame length in dry brush reached a few meters under afternoon wind, which pushed surface temperatures on the fire side of the line well above comfort limits. The safe direct attack threshold depends on flame length. When flames rise above a meter, crews often switch to parallel line or indirect work. On the Dixie slopes, flame length moved from workable to unsafe within a single gust cycle. The transition forced a retreat a few dozen meters to a safer contour, and the pause for reassessment added time while the fuel ahead continued to preheat and spot. A short case from Butte County in 2019 shows the mechanism. A 3-person module cut mineral line with Pulaski and McLeod for 40 minutes along a 30-meter segment above a road near Concow. The air sat near 30 degrees, and the slope funneled a dry upslope breeze. One sawyer began to cramp, with forearm stiffness and a light headache. The lead called a 5-minute shade break behind the road cut, swapped the saw for a shovel, and pushed a small electrolyte packet with cool water. The cramp eased, but the team's line speed fell by a third, and the flank extended before the hose team could anchor the corner. Evaporation works only if the air can take more moisture. During red flag periods in Northern California and Western Oregon, relative humidity often sat in single digits through the afternoon, and vapor pressure deficit held high. Sweat left the skin faster than people could replace it, but thirst lagged by 20 to 30 minutes. The crew therefore moved into a zone where core temperature rose while they still felt usable. On paper, the work rest cycle planned short pauses each half hour. In the dust and noise, those pauses slipped, and small deferrals stacked into large heat debt. This debt did not announce itself until coordination began to fray. Core temperature drift past a narrow band produced confusion and small motor errors. When the body moved above the high 30s Celsius, grip strength fell, and foot placement became less precise. A firefighter on a steep cut bank took a short slide on loose duff and bumped a knee against a rock, a minor event that forced a tool swap and another pause. A second small slide sent dust into the eyes of a sawyer with a face covering already damp with sweat. The division called for a 15-minute cooldown in a blackened patch with open sky and less radiant heat. The pause helped, yet the day's thermal debt remained. Logistics compounded the problem. A portable tank near a drop point held a few thousand liters, but that water fed pumps, not just people. Not. A pump running a hose lay across a ridge burned through fuel in under an hour, and the nearest cache sat a kilometer away along a rocky 2-track. A utility vehicle could make the run if sparks and rolling rocks stayed off the road. Otherwise, a helicopter sling needed a safe hover window. Instead of leisurely resupply, teams counted bottles and shared sips. That kept the line staffed, but it also meant individuals finished the shift a few liters short, which impaired recovery overnight. Historical policy added important context for the heat problem. In 1935, the federal morning target encouraged early attack and short campaigns that ended by late morning when heat rose. Modern campaigns in 2018 through 2021 often required long operational periods that stretched from morning into evening under air that stayed warm and dry. The change from brief morning runs to day-long engagements shifted the main limiter from flames alone to combined heat and dehydration. Now, a plan that looks sound on a morning briefing board needs built-in cooling breaks and shaded staging areas, or the afternoon will cut output below safe holding speed. The micro-conclusion for heat is straightforward. On steep ground in California and Oregon during the peak seasons of this period, Thermoregulation fails before tactics stabilize when shade is scarce and humidity stays low. The first slip often arrives within the first hour, and the debt carries across the next day. As breathing rate rises to dump heat, the lungs pull more smoke, which turns the next limiter from water to air. The next module therefore turns from heat to the mechanics of smoke, fine particles and carbon monoxide that accumulate as the day advances and wind patterns shift. In September of 2020, a brown lid settled over the Willamette Valley from Salem to Portland, while fires in the Cascades pushed smoke down canyon after noon. Afternoon sun turned copper, headlights stayed on through the day, and the air tasted like damp ash. Road crews and engines staged at gravel turnouts because visibility on forest roads fell to a few car lengths. The public index called the air hazardous for several days in a row, and crews on ridges worked inside that same mass. The shift clock kept moving even when lungs and eyes started to fail first. Fine particles in the PM 2.5 class reach deep into the smallest airways and add strain with every minute. Unlike larger ash flakes that fall out fast, these particles stay suspended and ride thermal shifts. A firefighter who breathes that mix for a few hours begins to cough, then shortens stride without noticing. Carbon monoxide adds a second load by binding to hemoglobin and trimming oxygen delivery even when a person feels calm. A handheld monitor shows the trend, but the signal arrives after fatigue has already cut precision on a steep switchback. Respirators that could filter fine particles conflict with the heat problem from the first chapter. A tight mask traps warm air on the face and raises breathing effort under exertion. Self-contained breathing gear is not practical in wildland attack because the cylinders add heavy mass and would empty fast on a long flank. Instead, crews use bandanas or light face coverings that catch only large debris and offer modest relief. On a hot August ridge above the Feather River, the trade favors endurance for hours, yet it leaves the lungs exposed while the line still needs fine motor control and calm timing. Daily smoke follows terrain and wind. Night air sinks and gathers drainages, and morning inversions can hold smoke until sun breaks the cap near midday. A crew that cut well at dawn meets dense smoke by late morning when wind pushes from the interior toward a coastal gap. The timing matters because the same sawyer who moved well for the first hour now coughs through every cut. A simple task like clearing a choked hose takes longer when vision collapses to a few meters and hand signals become the main tool. Work slows even as the window for holding shrinks. A short case from the Riverside fire near Estacada in September of 2020 shows how smoke shifts risk. An engine company moved to scout a narrow spur when the smoke thickened from light grey to dark brown in minutes. The driver eased speed to a crawl, and the tailboard spotter walked the bumper with a handheld light even though it was early afternoon. A fallen limb appeared only at the last moment, and the truck stopped with a short slide on gravel. No damage followed, but the delay pushed the crew off schedule, and the flank gained length while they found another entry. Visibility governs machinery as much as lungs. A dozer that can build several hundred meters of line in an hour under clear air may work at a fraction of that speed when the operator can see only a short span of blade. Spot fires form beyond the visible edge, and then jump back at the crew through litter they thought was cold. The chainsaw team that could follow the machine now waits on safer spacing, so the stagger between dirt and brush removal grows. On a ridge above Highway 22, the compounding delays turned a planned morning anchor into an afternoon triage shift. Monitors for carbon monoxide ride on belts beside radios, and they call out parts per million as the day develops. The body treats low doses as noise until a threshold appears. Headache, nausea, and a drifting sense of effort arrive first. After a while, a firefighter misreads a hand signal or forgets a small step like checking a downhill escape route before starting a cut bank. The immediate fix is a move to a cleared safety zone and time in cleaner air. That solves the moment, yet the residual effect lingers and makes the next hour feel longer than it should. Public health guidance for communities during those weeks reinforces what crews feel on the line. In mid-September of 2020, households in Western Oregon taped doors and used box fans with furnace filters to build simple cleaners because official shelters filled fast. That same improvisation appeared at spike camps where command tried to set one clean tent for short rests. The measure helped a little, but filters clogged within a day, and generators that drove fans burned fuel that supply lines already rationed. Now, as then, clean air became a fuel that ran out just as fast as water. History shows that smoke as a limiting factor is not new, but the scale changed. During the Big Burn of 1910 in the Northern Rockies, smoke crossed whole states and trains ran by lantern. That event pushed policy toward vast early suppression and later helped shape the morning goal adopted in 1935. In 2020, the combination of drought, wind, and long campaigns created multi-week smoke events in both states, and crews rotated through that load while keeping pace with shifting divisions. The similarity is the choke on sight and lungs. The difference is duration tied to modern megafires. The micro-conclusion for smoke is that air becomes a second heat. Breathing and seeing degrade together, and both hit line speed and decision quality well before plans adapt. A firefighter who spends a long afternoon under dense smoke enters the evening with less reserve for the next push. The body tries to compensate by working harder at each movement, which pulls more air and drives up energy use. The next limiter turns to food and fuel for people. The following module moves into calories, glycogen, and the hard math of keeping pace when the shift stretches, and the pack already feels heavy. In early September of 2020 on the west side of the August complex near Ruth Lake, a hand crew left a spike camp before sunrise and hiked a few kilometers to a ridge. The air felt cool, yet the pack and tool already pressed on shoulders and hips. Within the first hour, the crew chief checked everyone for food on body, because pace and safety depend on steady fuel. The plan called for half a day of cutting and scraping, followed by hose work after water arrived. That plan assumed each person could deliver consistent power without long stalls for food or stomach trouble. Wildland work at this intensity demands roughly 4,000 to 6,000 kilocalories across a long shift, far above an office day. A person who eats only a standard lunch and a few small snacks cannot replace what that slope will pull from muscles and liver. Energy gels and bars help, yet they work only when spaced across hours with enough water and salt. Without that timing, legs feel hollow on the first steep climb, and fine motor tasks start to shake. In practice, the best performers nibble every 20 to 30 minutes and treat food like line gear rather than a comfort. The issued line lunch and a shelf-stable meal offer predictable calories, sodium, and simple sugars. A typical bag holds tortillas, nut butter, jerky, a small can of fruit, and a packet of electrolyte mix. On paper, that covers a large share of the day. On the ground, heat, smoke, and adrenaline suppress appetite during the moments when eating would pay the most. People save food for later, then face a sharp drop in pace near early afternoon. Instead of steady work, the line shifts to short bursts and long pauses while a few finally eat. That shift slows containment more than a missed saw cut. Glycogen depletion arrives quietly after an hour or two of steep side hilling with a tool in hand. The body switches toward fat, but the work still needs quick energy for short climbs and awkward foot plants. A sawyer carrying a mid-sized saw with fuel and bar oil adds several kilograms to the base load each trip along the cut bank. When forearms and back begin to shake, chain control suffers, small binds become hazards, and the sawyer must hand the tool to a partner. The swap prevents an injury, yet it halves cutting speed and ripples through the rest of the crew. A short case from the North Complex near Feather Falls in late September of 2020 shows the chain. A 4-person module built handline for about 90 minutes, then met a stand of small fur that required saw work above head height. The sawyer had eaten little since dawn because smoke and stress deadened hunger. After 2 cuts, the bar pinched, and a second team member had to wedge and free the saw. No one was hurt, but the pause burned precious minutes and pushed the group into the hottest part of the afternoon without a solid anchor. Food timing, not strength, set the ceiling. Electrolytes matter as much as volume. Drinking only plain water after heavy sweating can drive sodium too low and bring on headache, nausea, and cramps by midday. Crews carry small packets of powdered mix for this reason, and engines often stock saltier snacks like pretzels for quick fixes. In 2018, near Reading, a firefighter who had chased spot fires all morning drank a few liters without salt, then cramped during a brief hose lay. A teammate mixed a salty drink and massaged a calf while they moved the person into shade. The cramp eased, but the flank gained length. Supply lines set the menu and the timing. Mobile kitchens and caterers feed hundreds, yet smoke, road closures, and long travel push dinner past dark and breakfast toward the edge of briefing. A spike camp might get hot food late, then coffee and cold items before first light. People who sleep through a late dinner to catch extra rest start the next day with a deficit. The next afternoon they slow earlier than planned and dip into emergency snacks that were supposed to cover the night. Logistics solved one problem, yet moved the limit into the tissues that hold the shovel. Caffeine helps attention and mood for an hour or 2, yet it does not add calories. A person who relies on cups alone can mask fatigue until a sudden drop arrives during a complex task like improving a switchback or laying hose across wind-shifted ground. Stomach upset also follows when coffee lands on an empty gut after a hard climb. Now the firefighter faces a trade: push and risk a mistake, or pause and eat while the flank expands. The safest choice is a short stop and a small, salty snack, but that choice lives inside a clock that the fire keeps turning. The pattern appeared again in southern Oregon during the bootleg fire in mid-summer of 2021. Crews who paced food and drink from the first hour kept steady output into evening even when smoke returned afternoon. Teams that delayed eating and relied on one large break hit a wall near midday and needed longer pauses in the hottest window. The difference was not dramatic on any single minute, yet it filled the gap between a held corner and a long slop-over. On extended attack, steady fueling is the quiet tactic that upholds every visible tool. The micro-conclusion for energy is that food, salt, and timing decide whether strength converts into safe line speed. Without planned intake, hands shake, decisions slow, and small errors multiply under heat and smoke. A crew can borrow speed for an hour, but the debt returns by afternoon and compounds overnight. The next limit shifts from inside the body to the tools in hand. The following module moves to the mechanics of Pulaski and McLeod work: saw teams, line width, and the rate at which dirt can outpace flame when time and space keep shrinking. In late August of 2021, near Grizzly Flats on the Calder Fire, a hand crew stepped off a road cut at first light to finish a thin strip above a drainage. The ground held a steady side slope, and brush stems were thick enough to slow each swing. Within the first hour, the crew discovered that tool speed, not boldness, ruled the morning. Dirt had to reach clean mineral in a continuous band, and every missed clump of roots became a source for embers. The plan assumed steady cutting with brief saw support. The wind rose early, and the strip had to widen before the next gust. The core tools were simple and heavy. The Pulaski combined an axe blade and a grub hoe and cut roots through duff and light mineral soil. The McLeod paired a wide rake and a hoe, fast for scraping loose material and cleaning the edge. Shovels moved soil onto glowing litter to smother heat. Each handle brought leverage but also fatigue, and every swing on a side hill asked ankles and hips to hold balance on rolling rocks. A tool that seemed light on flat ground turned heavy after half an hour on broken slope, and safe technique reduced speed before the first spot showed itself. Saw teams cleared the path and trimmed ladder fuels to keep flames on the ground. A common mid-size saw with a bar near half a meter in length, roughly 20 inches, weighed several kilograms once fuel and oil filled the tanks. The crew mixed gasoline and two-stroke oil for the engine and carried bar oil in separate bottles. Every few cuts, the chain needed a short touch with a file to keep teeth even. A dull chain through dust heated the bar and pinched more easily. The small maintenance pauses protected the operator, yet they also slowed the push when wind began to rise. Line width set holding power. In light grass and leaf litter, a thin band might hold if crews could reach out with water. In brush and slash, a narrow strip failed as embers rolled down from above and ignited the lower edge. On the corridor slopes, supervisors called for a handline near a meter wide on fresh edges, with more width where slope and fuel loaded the odds. That width took time. On an easy traverse, a 4-person group could cut several dozen meters in an hour. On a steep, rocky cut with thick brush, the same group needed close to an hour for a short segment. A short case from the upper American River corridor helps fix the pace. A module of 3 used a Pulaski, a McLeod, and a shovel to build 30 meters of clean edge above a bend in 40 to 60 minutes, then paused to cool stumps with soil. The sawyer who had cleared the access rotated to the shovel to rest hands and forearms. A flare from a cedar root forced them to widen by another half meter, which cost 10 more minutes and 1 more round of scraping. The extra width lowered the chance of a rollout, yet the clock pushed them into hotter air sooner than planned. Water changed the equation when it could reach the edge. Portable pumps staged near drop points and fed hose lays that advanced with the line. A pump that moved several hundred liters each minute allowed crews to wet the edge, cool heavy fuels, and check heat with a quick spray. Yet pumps ran on small engines that burned fuel in less than an hour, and hose across a rocky slope kinked unless tended by careful hands. In practice, water boosted the handline only when logistics kept pace. Otherwise, a false sense of security settled in, and a dry, kinked lay gave little help when embers crossed. Dozers offered speed where terrain allowed, carving a bench a few meters wide that hand crews then cleaned and improved. On steep ground above river canyons and among boulders, machines could not pass, and the work returned to steel and sweat. In Oregon's Santiam Canyon in early September of 2020, machine access faded a few kilometers from the highway, and hand crews had to build indirect line on a higher ridge. The indirect choice reduced immediate heat and smoke, but it increased length and time before tie-in. That trade lowered risk per minute and raised total exposure across the day. Tool failure and small injuries arrived as the shift lengthened. A wooden handle loosened in a head and needed a wedge. A chain stretched and walked on the bar until the sawyer stopped to reset tension. A glove seam rubbed a blister on a thumb, which cut grip strength during a tricky downhill swing. Each fix took only minutes, yet the pauses stacked and altered rhythm. The fire did not pause. A gust unseated hot ash from a stump and rolled sparks toward the lower edge. The crew heard the call and stepped into a quick search and cold trailing drill that cost more minutes. Training and rotation preserved speed when fatigue built. Sawyers swapped to scraping to rest forearms. Scrapers moved to shovels to rest backs and hips. A well-run module kept the line moving without long breaks by treating each person as a moving part rather than a fixed role. In 2019 near Shasta Lake, a crew held a difficult corner by rotating every quarter hour on the worst slope. The measured approach cost pride in the moment, yet it prevented a late slide and a hand injury that would have removed one person for the next 2 days. Slow protection sustained overall speed. The micro-conclusion for tools is that dirt must beat flame in both space and time, and hand tools set a ceiling that wind and slope can breach in minutes. Where fuels are heavy or slopes are steep, a meter of clean mineral soil with timely water is the minimum that buys hours rather than minutes. The moment wind begins to pulse, hand speed alone cannot hold every spot. the next limiter moves from human output to fire behavior itself. The following module turns to indices of risk, to the dry foehn winds called Santa Ana and Diablo, and to the sudden leaps in intensity that erase careful morning gains. In early September of 2020, a strong east wind crossed the Cascades and blew downslope toward the Willamette Valley, while multiple fires aligned with canyons. Afternoon relative humidity sat in the single digits, and fine fuels crackled underfoot by late morning. Flame length in brush rose from about 1 meter to several meters within a short gust cycle. Rates of spread moved from slow creep to tens of meters each minute on aligned slopes. Crews who had planned direct attack at daybreak stepped back to parallel line when wind and slope erased the morning cushion. Risk lives in numbers that predict fuel and atmosphere. The energy release component, introduced as a seasonal indicator, climbed into the very high and extreme percentiles across Northern California and Western Oregon during late summer of 2020 and 2021. The Haynes Index, which rates atmospheric instability, posted high values on days when plumes built tall and then bent under ridgetop winds. A division that read those signals at a morning briefing shifted tactics before noon toward indirect line and larger safety zones. Those who treated the day as average met a faster fire than their maps implied. Fuel moisture set a low ceiling for safety. Fine fuels that dry within an hour held moisture near 5% on red flag days, and medium sticks that dry over 10 hours sat only a little higher. Heavy dead fuels still felt solid under boots, but the thin layer of needles and leaves carried fire faster than a human could walk uphill. When a gust lined up with a chute, spotting climbed a ridge and crossed into the next basin in minutes. A hose lay with a small nozzle could cool the edge, yet it could not stop embers that rode wind well beyond the wet line. Spotting distance grew with wind speed and canopy structure. Embers lifted from torching crowns and rode turbulent eddies for hundreds of meters, sometimes more, then found duff under fir and pine. On the west slope of the Oregon Cascades during the Labor Day event in 2020, crews reported ember showers that forced repeated checks of roadsides and cut banks. Engines leapfrogged to hold culverts and curves where rolling material would land. The tactic worked for a time, but each patrol consumed people who were not on the main line. As the spread front widened, the distance between safe anchor points grew larger. Terrain amplified the wind. A south-facing slope heated faster by mid-morning and began to draft air upslope even as the synoptic flow pushed from the east. Canyons turned the combined flow and accelerated it around bends where crews had to traverse narrow benches. Flame length that measured under a meter on a flat patch doubled or tripled on an incline with grass and brush. A handline a meter wide on flat ground could not hold when embers rolled down through cut stumps and lit dry litter beneath logs. The same width above a steeper bench delivered only a brief delay before slopover. A case from the Kincaid Fire in Sonoma County in late October of 2019 shows the role of Diablo winds. Gusts on the highest ridges surpassed 20 meters per second overnight and into morning, and humidity stayed near the lower teens. Power shutoffs reduced some ignitions, yet the existing fire ran across vineyards and oak savanna with ember casts that jumped paved roads. Crews who had built dozer line the day before found that line overrun at a few saddles by mid-morning. They shifted to structure defense in Geyserville and Healdsburg while air support paused during the worst turbulence. Plume dynamics added a second driver of surprise. On the Dixie Fire in July of 2021, a tall column built through midday and then bent with high-level winds aloft. Later, a downdraft from the column collapsed over a flank and pushed surface winds in a new direction for a short window. That pulse drove flame into unburned fuel where crews had worked a thin line. The sudden change forced a withdrawal along pre-planned escape routes and a reset on a road 2 kilometers away. The speed of the shift exceeded what line scouts could signal over voice alone. Indices guided decisions, yet they did not stop the wind. The burning index, which blends spread and intensity, rose into values that signaled only indirect tactics with strong anchors. The ventilation index used for smoke dispersion sometimes posted low numbers in the morning before winds mixed, then jumped by afternoon, spreading both smoke and fire. A crew that read those numbers carried more hose and scouted wider black for safety zones. A crew that skipped the morning weather talk walked into a day where small errors compounded under wind that was both strong and erratic. History underscored the cost of wind shifts tied to storms. In 2013 at Yarnell Hill in Arizona, a thunderstorm outflow reversed wind in minutes and trapped a hotshot crew in brush with limited safety options. 19 people died within a short span after the change. The lesson traveled with every briefing card in California and Oregon during 2018 through 2021. Outflow boundaries remained a critical watch item on days when towering cumulus appeared over ridges by afternoon. Even without storms overhead, distant cells could change local winds before a lookout could see the sign. The micro-conclusion for fire behavior is steady. When wind, slope, and dry fuel align, intensity and spread jump faster than hand tools and hose can adapt. A plan that works at dawn fails by early afternoon unless it already includes wider lines, larger buffers, and rapid shifts to indirect tactics. People can move only so fast in gear on steep ground, and aircraft cannot always fly in turbulent smoke. The next limit therefore becomes movement itself. The following module turns to terrain, navigation, speed of foot travel, and the narrow corridors that decide whether crews can reach or leave a ridge in time. In early September of 2020, along the Santiam Canyon above Oregon Highway 22, crews tried to reach a ridge spur as an east wind pushed through saddles. The single-lane forest road allowed only one direction at a time, with turnouts spaced by a few hundred meters and some blocked by fallen limbs. A hand crew left the trucks and moved on foot because dust and smoke cut sight below a few car lengths. Within about 15 minutes, the ridge narrowed and the safe turnaround vanished. The corridor that looked open on a map became a funnel that trapped heat and delayed retreat. Foot speed on steep side hills drops under load. A firefighter carrying near 20 kilograms of pack, water, and a tool climbs at roughly 2 to 3 kilometers per hour on a grade near 30%, slower on loose rock. Downhill travel is not free because knees and ankles break each step to stay upright on gravel. A 1 kilometer approach on a map can stretch toward half an hour when brush and deadfall force short detours. That pace sets a firm upper bound on how fast a crew can withdraw when wind shifts, even before the first ember lands below the trail. Navigation adds friction in smoke. Paper topographic maps show 20-meter contours that warn of cliffs and chutes, but in brown air, the next switchback may be invisible until the boot toes find a cut bank. Handheld mapping on phones works in airplane mode with preloaded tiles, yet dense canopies and canyons still scramble location for long moments. Compass work helps on open ridges, but brush and snags disrupt straight bearings. In practice, a lookout on a high point with a clear line of sight does more than any icon on a screen. The map guides, the slope and wind decide. Corridors govern engines and dozers. A narrow ridge road with brush on both sides leaves little room for a pump panel or a safe door swing. A dozer needs several meters of width to bench a passable lane. Boulders and rotten logs turn that width into a patchwork of short advances and backing moves. Turnarounds large enough for a water tender appear only every few bends, and some sit on fill that slumps under heat. A blocked culvert sends hot material across a curve and severs the route in minutes. The difference between open and closed is measured in one downed tree. A short case from the Riverside fire near Estacada in early September of 2020 shows the trap. An engine and a hand crew scouted a spur for access and met a jackstraw of firs across the track. The chainsaw cleared for a short span, then a snag leaned out of reach. The engine could not nose pass without risking a dented tank. The crew continued on foot to check a tie-in, then smoke thickened and visibility fell below a few meters. They returned to the truck after a half hour, but the flank had already extended. The corridor turned a simple scout into a costly loop. Night movement trades heat for sight. After sunset, temperature drops and work feels easier, yet headlamps flatten the ground and hide depth in loose rock. On the Mackenzie corridor during the Labor Day event, crews flagged escape routes with glow sticks and reflective tape at intervals of a few dozen meters, so that a hasty retreat would not veer off a cut bench. The system worked until wind pushed new smoke into the canyon and dew-glazed duff. Footing grew slick, and what had been a steady downhill walk turned into slow steps with a hand on the uphill bank. Escape routes and safety zones require space that terrain rarely grants. The rule of thumb is simple. A safety zone grows with flame height, often 4 times the expected tall flame in each direction on open ground. On brushy slopes with trees, that rule fails unless heavy equipment clears a wide patch well in advance. In the upper Feather River country, a hand crew once marked a small black patch as a fallback, then learned that torching crowns threw embers far beyond its edge. They moved along a road to a wider bend and lived inside that wider buffer while engines cooled the verge. Helicopters do not erase terrain. A pilot needs a landing zone with clear approaches and an open area perhaps 30 by 30 meters for a short set down, larger in tall trees or with gusty winds. Smoke that hides the ground or a turbulent rotor wash across burning snags cancels the option. On days with a flight restriction and many fires, aircraft cycle across long distances and arrive later than a plan assumes. A crew that waits for a quick lift may instead hike for an hour to reach a safer ridge. Air is a support, not a guaranteed exit. History fixes the cost of poor egress on steep ground. In July of 1994 on Storm King Mountain above Glenwood Springs, the South Canyon fire trapped firefighters who tried to outrun flame on a steep slope through oak and mixed brush. 14 people died after wind shifted and escape routes proved too slow for the terrain and fuel. That case became a standard in training packets for California and Oregon during later decades. The lesson is plain in 2 lines. Steep country shortens time, and brush cancels straight paths. The map hides both until the hour grows late. The micro-conclusion for movement is that terrain and corridors throttle every plan before crews feel slow. A ridge that narrows by a few meters, a culvert blocked by a burned log, or a slope that tilts beyond stable footing turns a clear arrow on a briefing map into a trap. Lookouts, communications, escape routes, and safety zones need to be named, marked, and rehearsed before tools touch soil, or the first wind pulse will choose for the crew. The next module turns to that framework, from shared radio plans to the daily habit now known in the field as LCES. At first light on a September morning along the Mackenzie River corridor, division supervisors unfolded maps on a hood and assigned call signs for 1 command channel, 2 tactical channels, and 1 air contact window. The Incident Command System, nested within the National Incident Management System adopted in 2004, framed who spoke where and when. Within the first hour, runners checked whether repeaters on nearby peaks carried voices through canyons that twisted out of sight. The plan looked clean on paper. In smoke and terrain, each bend turned that plan into a timed test of range, order, and restraint. Radios lived on very high frequency bands, which travel far but bounce poorly in deep slots. Repeaters on ridges bridged shadows, yet batteries drained faster when crews transmitted often during wind shifts. A spare battery weighed little alone, but a few spares per person multiplied across a module became real mass. Hand mics dragged against pack straps, and dust clogged speaker grills unless crews brushed them clean at every brief pause. When a truck idled near a ridge, its alternator topped handhelds through charges. When trucks stayed far below, the net rested on pockets of charge and strict radio discipline. Lookouts tied the network to ground truth. A person on a mid-slope knob with a clear view called wind changes torching trees and new spots with plain words and short compass bearings. The habit known as lookouts, communications, escape routes, safety zones began as a simple checklist and became a daily rhythm. One lookout could watch a kilometer of flank in open timber, less in brush. When smoke thickened, that same person stepped uphill or shifted to a rock outcrop to keep eyes on the main run. The lookout's slow, steady voice carried farther than any excited burst. A short case from the holiday farm fire near Vida in early September shows the pressure on nets. As east wind peaked, traffic on a single tactical channel climbed until calls stepped on each other. A saw injury report overlapped a hose request, and both collided with an engine calling a blocked culvert. The division switched triage to the command net and sent a runner to a nearby spike to cut load. The runner needed roughly 20 minutes round trip on a dusty track. No one missed a life threat, but the delay pushed a planned burnout into the next hour. Interagency work added friction that NIMS tried to smooth. Federal hotshots, state engines, county tenders and city crews arrived with different radio templates. Many carried national cache handhelds, yet tones and channel names still differed by region. Technicians loaded shared code sets during the morning, but line assignments changed faster than programming. A county engine might hear half the traffic on a tactical channel and miss air updates that lived on a second net. The fix was a clear local plan posted at staging and rechecked at midday. Without that step, voices drifted past one another. Position tools helped, then failed in canyons. Satellite messengers worked under open sky and let a crew chief send short location pings to a planning tent. The global positioning system lost lock under deep canopy, or reported a point a few dozen meters off the true bench. Paper map grids never lost power, yet eyes in smoke read them slowly. Crews used a hybrid method. A lookout spoke in landmarks, a runner carried a pencil sketch of switchbacks, and a supervisor stitched those pieces into one picture. The method felt old, but it moved faster than waiting on a perfect fix. Air coordination depended on timing and clarity. An air attack platform circled high and kept a single air-to-ground window open for ground units. When inversion layers broke near midday, helicopters rose to drop water and recon narrow spurs. Turbulence and thick smoke sometimes shut flying down for hours, and the air net went quiet while ground net stayed hot. A guard phrase began each call to prevent confusion with adjacent divisions. The habit looked formal for a reason. On days when two fires shared a ridge, one wrong coordinate could send a drop into the wrong drainage. Briefings made order out of fatigue. A morning talk set objectives, then division breakouts assigned work, marked escape routes, and named safety zones that met the day's flame length. Cards in chest pockets carried frequencies, tone guards, and the day's branch structure. In the evening, a short after-action review noted misses, near hits, and changes for dawn. Crews repeated a steady phrase about keeping eyes up and speaking early. The words sounded basic, but they stood between a clean withdrawal and a late scramble down a narrow bench in dirty air. A short case from the Dixie perimeter shows a practical failure and recovery. A repeater on a ridge ran out of generator fuel near late afternoon and left one side of a division in a dead zone. The division switched to direct, radio-to-radio contact at low power and posted a lookout on a knoll to relay over the hump. A runner carried a fresh can of fuel from a road below, and the site came back alive near sunset. The fix worked because the fallback was simple, known, and drilled. Fancy plans would have failed in the same window. The micro-conclusion for communications is plain. Radios, lookouts, and structure hold a line together only when they draw power from predictable habits and short words. Nets saturate as shifts lengthen and minds tire, so clarity must arrive before fatigue blurs speech. The next limiter is therefore sleep, because long operational periods and night work erode cognition, balance, and restraint. The following module turns to 12 to 16-hour shifts, thin sleep in spike camps, small injuries that hide under adrenaline, and the quiet math of how a tired brain turns simple steps into accidents by the second day. On a late July night in 2021 on the west side of the Dixie Fire near Lake Almanor, crews finished a burnout just before midnight and bedded down at a spike camp set beside a gravel pit. The sleeping window was set at barely 5 hours between the end of night operations and a dawn briefing. Diesel generators hummed, a pump thumped every few breaths, and a helicopter cycled overhead at first light to recon a ridge. Thin foam pads on the rocky ground gave limited recovery, and the next shift still ran 12 to 16 hours. The math was plain before sunrise because eyes that had tracked embers until near midnight would track chainsaw chips before noon. Sleep debt undercuts balance and judgment in ways that feel small until a step fails. After a short night, simple foot placement on a 30% side slope begins to wobble after the first hour. A firefighter who has walked that grade for years starts to misjudge a half-meter of loose duff at the edge of a cut bank. The correction costs an extra step every few minutes and drains focus before lunch. That loss combines with heat and smoke carried over from the prior day, and the margin for quick, clear decisions shrinks by the size of one slow breath. The body hides tiredness during the first stretch under adrenaline, then the mask slips. In the second hour, the eyes dry in smoke, and reaction to a sudden hand signal lags by a heartbeat. A sawyer hears a shout to check a bind, and pauses a fraction late, which forces a partner to wedge a kerf that would not have closed the day before. The same person feels an ache in a wrist from a small strain taken 2 days earlier while lifting hose. Micro injuries like that build one by one until a full grip on a Pulaski handle slips during a high chop and the swing shortens. Spike camps crowd tasks into fixed clocks that ignore the human curve. Breakfast lines form in the dark, and a team might walk 15 minutes to reach hot food. Briefings begin on time, then stretch because wind and road closures change division boundaries overnight. The delay eats the last minutes that could have been spent on a nap. The walk to the truck adds another few minutes, and the drive to the drop point eats a half hour on a washboard track. By the time boots hit soil, the crew has already burned a portion of a small sleep reserve without cutting a meter of line. Night operations trade heat and smoke for darkness and noise. A blackout rig with covered lights inches along a ridge and headlamps flatten depth on broken ground. A chunk of basalt the size of a helmet rolls under a boot and twists an ankle. The injury seems minor, yet it steals full power from a leg for the next 12 hours. A medic wraps the joint with elastic and notes the time. The person returns to scraping, slower and stiffer, and the rest of the squad adjusts pace. A short stumble taken under thin sleep now taxes 5 people across one long day. Cognition erodes in patterns that safety officers can chart. Attention spans contract to a few minutes, and checklists once read line by line become memory games performed under noise. A lookout forgets to rotate batteries at mid-shift and loses a radio in the first hour of afternoon wind. A pump operator skips a priming step, hears the engine cough, and restarts while a hose lay waits. Each lapse lasts seconds, yet those seconds arrive more often as the day pushes past the 10th hour. The fixes are simple on paper and expensive in minutes under wind. A short case from the Slater fire on the California-Oregon border in mid-September of 2020 shows the slope of fatigue. A mixed crew finished a late burnout, then caught 4 hours of broken sleep under a tarp during a light drizzle. At mid-morning, the division called for a quick push to tie 2 lines before a forecast wind shift. Before noon, a sawyer misread a bind in wet alder and pinched the bar. A second teammate slipped on clay while placing a wedge and bruised a hip. No one left the line, yet the pair's pace fell by a third for the rest of the day. The tie-in held, but only because a relief module arrived from a road below. Command tries to buy back recovery with rotations and shorter operational periods, yet large fires during this era often erase that plan. When the August complex sprawled across 4 counties, travel times between camps, divisions, and heli bases stretched into hours, and relief arrived later than briefing cards promised. A person who expected 8 hours off received 6, with 2 consumed by driving and chow. By the second day, the deficit turned from yawns into hard limits on mood and restraint. Voices grew short over the radio, and patience for a safe, slow cut thinned at the very hour wind began to rise. The only reliable counter against growing errors is to shorten exposure before the cliff. Supervisors who cut shifts by an hour and banked naps during cool periods lost a little morning output and gained safety in late afternoon. Camps that set quiet hours and enforced soft light rules lowered night noise enough to add a real hour of sleep. Those measures felt slow during the first day and saved speed on the second. The next limiter sits at the edge of policy and practice, because safety nets only work when people follow them under pressure and know how to use their last resort. The following module turns to the 10 standard orders, the 18 watch-out situations, the modern shelter adopted after 2002, and the blunt lessons of fires that turned sudden changes into tragedies. Safety doctrine runs on simple phrases that must survive stress. The 10 standard firefighting orders adopted in 1957 begin with keeping informed on fire weather and expect supervisors to base actions on current and expected behavior. The companion list of 18 watch-out situations warns about places and moments when small errors become entrapments, such as building line downhill with fire below or working under unburned fuel between a crew and a fire. In California and Oregon during these seasons, every morning briefing card folded those 2 lists into a few lines that crews could hold in a smoke-dimmed mind. Shelters changed after 2002, when agencies introduced the new generation fire shelter with a stronger outer foil and a laminated structure designed to better resist abrasion and convective heat. The shelter stayed a last resort, never a tactic, and training framed deployment as an admission that the chain of safe choices had already broken. A shelter weighed less than a few kilograms, rode in a sleeve at the small of the back, and opened in seconds if practiced often. People drilled kneeling on the hinge side, feet toward heat, and face close to the ground, where air might stay cooler for a short time. On Yarnell Hill in Arizona in 2013, a thunderstorm outflow flipped winds in minutes and pinned a hotshot crew in chaparral between a saddle and a drainage. 19 people died after a rapid attempt to reach a flat ranch site failed under shifting wind and heavy brush. The event sat in every training session in the years that followed, including those attended by crews who later worked the campfire and the large complexes in Oregon. The lesson spoke to speed and options. Safety zones must be present, flagged, and reachable within minutes, not imagined as dots beyond brush and topography. History carried the same rule from the South Canyon fire on Storm King Mountain in 1994. 14 people died on a steep slope after winds shifted, fire ran upslope through oak and mixed conifer, and escape routes proved too slow for the grade. The after-action work pushed agencies to harden lookout duty, to enforce communications drills, and to tie every assignment to real escape routes and named safety zones. Those steps later merged with the wider command framework and became daily habits. When crews in California and Oregon spoke the letters for lookout, communications, escape, and safety at dawn, they were naming the lessons of prior losses. Field practice turned words into muscle memory. On a narrow ridge above Conco in 2019, a module rehearsed a shelter drill in under a minute on flat ground, then repeated on a 30% slope with loose rock and brush. The time doubled on the slope, and people learned how tools snagged on straps and how a pack needed to drop before a clean deploy. In a later operational period, 2 members faced a gust-driven flare against a cut bank and opened their shelter bags before wind eased. They did not deploy, but they lost seconds repacking, which reminded the group why drills include decisions to stop early. Shelters do not fix poor choices. A scraped patch too small for tall flame will not protect a group against long radiant heat. A road cut that looks open may channel wind and embers and reach temperatures that melt plastic and paint on vehicles. On the Dixie Fire, an engine that parked under a green tree at first light later found itself under torching crowns when upslope wind grew and the crown base dried. The crew moved the engine in time, but the lesson stayed on the log. A safety zone picks itself only if people fall back to doctrine and measure size by expected flame, not by comfort. Orders and watch-out items help only if they remain live in the mouth. A division that opened each morning with one order and one watch-out, spoken by a different person each day, saw fewer near misses than a division that treated the lists as wallpaper. In late afternoon, when fatigue and heat stacked, someone repeated a short line about maintaining prompt communications with crew members, and the reminder cut through radio clutter. Another day, a supervisor said the line about building downhill with fire below, and a team shifted to a contour route that added minutes and removed a trap. A short case from the Archie Creek fire on the North Umpqua River in 2020 shows both sides. A hand crew widened a line near a road bend while a spot grew below them. The lookout saw a gust push flame uphill and called a move to a turn in the road that had been named as a safety zone during morning briefing. 2 people hesitated to grab their line gear, then ran heavy and dropped tools on the road. The flame reached the prior cut within minutes and burned hot for a short span. Gear was later recovered and no one was hurt. The after-action note was clear. Naming the site in the morning bought seconds that the crew used in the afternoon. The micro-conclusion for safety is that doctrine and drills only matter when rehearsed into the hands and feet before a shift and spoken aloud under pressure. The 10 orders and 18 watch-out items cut through noise by giving words to hazards that recur. The shelter remains a last wall, not a plan. When people are tired and smoke turns noon into dusk, price and supply begin to push on choices that seem tactical but are largely economic. The final module turns to contracts, base pay, fuel and water logistics, and the cost of a late decision when aircraft, engines and crews must be rationed across whole regions. In the summer of 2021, the federal government raised the base hourly pay for many federal wildland firefighters to $15, with overtime and hazard premiums added when conditions met criteria. The number looked better than prior seasons, and yet faced rents and fuel prices that had moved faster in many California and Oregon towns. A hand crew member who lived hours from a duty station paid for shared housing near a forest unit or slept in a vehicle between assignments. The raised floor helped with retention for a time, but long campaigns and travel still eroded take-home gains. Engines, dozers, and aircraft run on fuel that moves over long distances. A water tender that hauls several thousand gallons, roughly near 10,000 liters, burns significant diesel on mountain roads and idles through staging while pumps fill portable tanks. A tender assigned to the August complex drove hours each way to a secure depot when local stations ran dry or closed for safety. The round trip turned one vehicle into a thin hose between the fire and the valley. Each hour that hose was in transit, a division rationed water across competing flanks and decided which corner would hold and which would wait. Hose, nozzles, and pump kits come from national caches that can stretch thin during multi-state runs. A division might request several kilometers of 1.5-inch hose and receive a mix of diameters and brands that require different gaskets and couplings. A tool order placed by morning reaches a drop point near dusk if roads remain open. If not, the order waits until the next day. On the North Complex, a shipment of hose sat behind a road closure while a culvert burned and a slope slumped across the asphalt. Crews stitched short sections from older stock and lost time while a larger plan rerouted the load. Catering and camp services scale to hundreds and sometimes thousands of people. Each meal costs real money, and every added day of a large incident pulls from budgets that also fund prescribed fire and fuel reduction in the cool months. A camp that keeps crews fed and showered holds morale and reduces illness, yet moving that camp when the wind changes costs trucks, hours, and fuel. In 2020, at a camp near Ruth Lake, a move of a few dozen kilometers to escape smoke meant breaking down tents, kitchens, and showers in the morning and rebuilding them by night. Crews slept less that day and worked under heavier air the next. Aircraft time carries the steepest price and the tightest constraints. A large air tanker drops a single load that buys minutes or an hour, not a full day, unless ground crews connect that drop to dirt. Helicopters lifting water from lakes and portable tanks pay for every minute spent in the air through maintenance and crew hours that do not return. Command weighs those minutes against wind forecast and road access. A late request that arrives after turbulence closes a window becomes a note on the next morning's board. In practice, money and weather meet in a short midday band and then part again. Contracts shape who shows up and with what equipment. Private crews under call when needed agreements stage near likely corridors and wait for dispatch that may not come if public resources suffice. Daily rates must cover payroll, fuel, tires, and repairs on washboard roads that chew suspensions in a week. In 2021, a small contractor brought 2 engines to the Caldor fire under an emergency call and lost 1 water pump to grit by the 3rd day. The pump waited for parts for 2 more days. The crew kept working with a partner engine, and the contract barely broke even after a week. The cost of a small mistake often exceeds a week of wages. A slop-over that burns a few dozen hectares can demand a day of helicopter time and the attention of multiple engines and a hand crew that might have anchored a separate corner. In late afternoon, when fatigue peaks, a mist stump that smolders under duff can send sparks below a road and force a night shift that runs until dawn. The bill lands on agencies and the public, but the price is counted in hours of sleep lost and lines not built elsewhere. The tally recurs across long seasons and grows with each large fire. A short case from the Holiday Farm fire shows the cycle. A spike camp moved to a schoolyard in a small town after smoke choked a prior site. The change added 40 minutes of driving each way to the nearest drop point. Fuel deliveries to the camp passed through a roadblock staffed by a small county team that had worked long days for a week. The evening meal arrived late after a supplier lost a driver to illness and called a replacement from farther away. Crews ate fast and slept short. The next day, the same crews cut slowly in the hottest hours. Logistics multiplied small delays into a full shift's drift. The micro-conclusion for money and logistics is that dollars and distance edit tactics before a Pulaski hits soil. Pay sets who can stay for a season, fuel sets where engines and tenders can reach, and supply lines set where the water and hose connect dirt to cooling. Choices at 1 in the afternoon ride on budgets set months before, and errors at 3 in the afternoon cost time and cash that could have paid for cool season fuel work. The margins look invisible on a map and appear as missed meters of line on a ridge under wind. Taken together, the limits of heat, smoke, food, tools, wind, terrain, communications, sleep, safety practice, and money form one chain that fails at its weakest link by late morning or early afternoon. On the campfire in 2018, on the August complex in 2020, and on the Dixie fire in 2021, crews met the same clocks and traded speed for safety while maps promised more than slopes would allow. The lesson is not about heroics. It is about thresholds that move faster than a human body can, and about systems that must allocate air, water, and quiet as carefully as hose and fuel. 3 clear points follow. First, people fail first on heat and air, which means hydration, shade, and clean breathing space, buy more work hours than most visible tools. Second, fatigue and logistics degrade fine control by the second day, So rest and supply must be planned as tactics, not comforts. Third, wind and terrain remain outside control, which is why anchors, buffers, and early indirect choices save lives when the numbers climb. A person who understands those points reads a map with weather and time in mind and sees why even strong crews in California and Oregon from 2018 through 2021 often gave up ground by late day and returned at dawn to try again,